I think we're good. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar Breaking Down the SBA Shutdown, Real-Time Guidance for Brokers. Now, this will be recorded afterwards and up on the member portal. And also at the end, we will have a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please just enter them into the chat box. All right, and I'll let them get started.
All right, welcome to a very special edition of IBBA Insights. This is our very first live broadcast for our IBBA members. Here in the United States, we're experiencing a government shutdown, in case you didn't know. Today, we're going to focus on the impact it's having on the sale and purchase of businesses, specifically where it pertains to SBA financing. Now, this is such an important topic that I'm not going to do it alone. Two gentlemen joining me today typically are behind the scenes making this show possible, but today they're going to join me as our co-hosts, helping us navigate through this important topic. These men are not only experts in business brokerage, but my good friends, Neil Isaacs and Jeff Snell. How's it going, guys?
It's going good. Excited to get this thing kicked off.
Yeah, glad to be here.
All right. Well, for those of you that listen to our podcast or watch our podcast, if we ever have an important topic, we go straight to the source. You're out there wondering, how's this going to impact me? How is it affecting me? Well, we're going to talk about these things, and we're going to talk to people who are deeply involved in SBA lending and well-known across the United States. So at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce John Randall, the Managing Director of Small Business Banking at Live Oak Bank, and John Wahl, Director of Small Business Banking at Live Oak Bank. Welcome, Johns.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
We're happy that you pretty much at a moment's notice dropped everything you had, opened your schedule, and canceled your late lunch and decided to be with us. So thank you. We're gonna jump right into this because it's a very important topic. But before we get started, I think it's important for our listeners to know, or the people that are watching this today to know, a little bit about yourselves and Live Oak.
Well, thanks, Cress. My name is John Randall because I've got the opportunity to work with my best friend of 25 years and work with him for 25 years doing SBA loans. I will go by JR and he will go by JW just to keep it straight. 25 years of SBA lending, greatest job in the world because we get to help people make some of the most important financial decisions of their lives, and helping the brokerage community get these transactions across the finish line has been an absolute wonderful life's work. It's fun to do it together. Live Oak Bank is been a great place to do it at. For 6 of the last 7 years, we've funded more SBA 7A loan dollars than any other bank in the country, primarily because we get to focus on larger business acquisitions between $2 and $8 million. And I wouldn't be at Live Oak if it wasn't for my friend, John Wahl.
Appreciate the opportunity. Been working with JR for a long time, and we'll just echo the opportunity to work with brokers across the country. Obviously, we lend in all 50 states. I am based out of Denver, Colorado. We've been doing this for a long time. We think that the processes that we bring to the table help make it easier for you as a broker to get buyer and seller to the table and get a deal inked.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. We're gonna jump into some questions for you so that people can hear all the wonderful and great things that are going on. So Neil, I'm gonna kick it over to you.
Yeah, for either of the Johns, thank you again for being here. With the shutdowns underway, and a lot of buyers and sellers are talking about, do you have your number? With this PLP number, there's this notion of you get it before the shutdown happens, and if you don't have it, then you can't do anything. That's kind of the sentiment. That's the conjecture out there. Can you tell us what people are talking about with the PLP number or the GP number? Let's get into that.
Absolutely. So for those of us that have been around for a long time, you remember the term SBA loan authorization. And that was a series of pages that summarized the SBA's loan approval. It's been renamed. It's now known as the SBA Terms and Conditions Sheet, but it's still your SBA loan approval, and it comes with an SBA loan number. Your bank approves the loan. The United States Small Business Administration also approves the loan, and that loan number comes with the terms and conditions sheet. And the reason everybody's talking about, do you have a loan number or not, is it's pretty much business as usual for the banks doing SBA loans. They're still issuing pre-qualification letters. They're still doing their in-house approvals. And if they have a loan number, they're still closing loans and hitting target dates. And the best SBA lenders worked way ahead of schedule and got a lot of those loan numbers so they can continue closing loans in the first week or 2 or 3 or sometimes even 4 after the government shutdown. But the reason everybody's asking, do you have a loan number, is because if you don't have that loan number, it means there is no SBA approval yet. And even though you have a bank approval, there's no SBA approval, and the SBA can't allow that closing until it's issued. So it's really important to understand, if you're a buyer, seller, or broker, if that loan number has actually been issued yet. And unfortunately, the buyer and the seller and the broker can't log into the SBA system, which is called E-Tran, to check. They have to rely on the bank that approved the loan. And typically the closing officer at that bank is who's going to have access to view if that number's issued. But they should have notified everybody right away once that number was received and told them, hey, you're on track to close, or we didn't get the loan number before the shutdown and they're no longer issuing numbers until the shutdown's over. J-Dub, you want to talk a little bit about which banks are going to get loan numbers quick and which ones might have a bit of a delay after the shutdown's over?
Yeah, I think it's important to just to back up. PLP, for those of you that don't know, that is the Preferred Lender Program. That means that you have autonomous authorization from the SBA because you have closed so many loans over the past and you have met their criteria. What that allows you to do is, as JR mentioned, it's not a full approval that is authorized when a PLP lender sends in a transaction, but it is a notification through the E-Tran system that they are approving these dollars and these dollars need to be allocated out of the total budget for this lender, as opposed to a GP lender, which is a lender that has to send their transaction to Sacramento or one of the 7 or 8 offices across the country to have a human actually go through and provide a credit approval for those. Those typically take a couple of weeks when the government is open, as opposed to a PLP lender that is able to put the information into E-Tran and almost simultaneously get that PLP number back. One of the important pieces of being able to get a PLP number is to be able to provide a necessary documentation, be it organizational documents, be it an APA, be it a 1919 document. Hopefully for anyone out there, they are working with a lender that has provided to them an opportunity to use a pre-qualify or an initial closing checklist. This is just an example of what lenders should be sending out to you as a broker, to a buyer, to a seller, that walks through those initial items. And within here is going to provide you a lot of the information that's necessary to get that PLP number. And even though the government isn't open today, being able to prepare these documents so that you can be in the queue, of which we'll talk a little bit about here in a moment, is critically important, because there is a list of documents that's necessary to be able to get that PLP number. I think one of the most important things for everyone out there to understand, SBA is closed currently. However, the IRS is currently open. The IRS is issuing out tax transcripts. Everyone on this call, I think, should know the importance of a tax transcript and the fact that the lender has to verify what was filed with the IRS to what the tax returns are that they used for their credit approval. The documents out there in 8821 is an authorization document that allows almost a power of attorney on behalf of the lender to obtain tax transcripts, tax returns. A lot of people might also be familiar with a 4506 document, which is allowed to be able to request tax documents from the IRS. Being able to obtain these right now, why the IRS is still open, is absolutely critical. So if you're working with a lender and they are doesn't matter if they're a PLP or GP lender, because you can still get these tax transcripts right now, but being able to get these completed and provide buyer information and seller information so the banks can complete these and obtain IRS tax transcripts will really help, because that's where the logjam tends to occur. Once the IRS closes, that line gets pretty long and can take days, if not weeks, to be able to clear, knowing and tax transcripts are going to be a requirement to be able to close. So
I really want to emphasize what J-Dub just said. There's two roadblocks in a government shutdown. The first is getting the loan number, and the second is getting the tax transcripts. And the transcripts are needed from both the buyer and the seller. In the past, at the end of government shutdowns, the IRS backlog of transcript requests has been fairly lengthy. Right now, the E-Tran system is still open for preferred lenders to upload documents. So as banks are approving loans, they're uploading all the documents, they're getting ready, so when the shutdown's over, they can hit submit and hopefully get a loan number in 2 or 3 days. But if they don't have tax transcripts, they're not going to be able to get that loan number. The IRS has said they would stay open for a little while after the government shutdown started to issue transcripts. But they could stop that process at any moment. So as soon as this call is over, I encourage you to gather these items from your buyers and sellers. And there might be some scenarios where sellers are saying, well, you don't have a full loan approval yet. I don't want to give you this information. Give the information to the bank. Let the bank get the tax transcripts, because if they miss that window, it could cause lengthy delays after the shutdown's over.
Thank you for that. It sounds like these numbers are almost like the handshake that was happening before the shutdown, and that can't happen while the shutdown's going on. But there are some other things that can happen, like working on the transcripts. Well, that can still happen. So tell us a little bit more. You're kind of getting into this, but expand a little bit more on what this means for buyers and sellers. Like what else should they do now? And when it does open up again, what are the after effects are going to be when we get back to the government being open?
So the good news is most shutdowns don't last that long. And maybe I can show a little chart here. Historically, the longest one's been 35 days. About a month. Mostly they've lasted less than 2 to 3 weeks. What we've found is that historically, shutdowns start to wind down when federal employees start missing paychecks. That's when a lot of pressure gets applied and breakthroughs occur. It's my understanding that federal employees that are paid bi-monthly will miss their first full paycheck this Friday. Next Wednesday, parts of the military may not get full paychecks unless there's a stopgap put in place. And the end of this month is when most other federal employees will miss full paychecks. So there's a few dates coming up in the next week or two that will apply a lot of pressure to hopefully ending this. The key is making sure you're prepared to be early in the line to get your loan number. So you should have a closing checklist. If the loan's not fully approved, hopefully you're working with a lender that's issued a preliminary closing checklist like J-Dub just showed. Work to knock those items out. Just like there was no shutdown. Be providing your purchase agreements and your tax ID numbers and your entity documents and insurance and go get the blood draw and the weight done to get life insurance in place. All the things you've got to do in a regular closing process. And know that if you're working with a preferred lender and you have tax transcripts, closing should take place in a pretty reasonable timeline once we come back online to issue loan numbers. My concern is for folks that might be working with a non-preferred lender that are going to be in that queue. What happens when a lender uploads documents to E-Tran if they're preferred is automated processes to generate an approval and a loan number. But for a non-preferred lender, an employee at the SBA actually has to review those loan docs and manually approve the loan. That's the queue where things are going to get backed up. And as brokers, be setting those expectations with your buyer and seller so they're either flexible on timelines or potentially looking at alternatives to speed it up.
JR, just for some clarification, you mentioned something earlier in the webinar about the timing of certain lenders being able to get these PLP and GP numbers perhaps faster than others. And you just touched on it again, so I think that's important. Is the only difference the bank's designation as a PLP or not, or is there other considerations that might go into it?
I think the major difference is PLP designation. Essentially, has the SBA given their approval rubber stamp to the bank so the bank can do that work, or does the SBA still have to manually review those loans? So that's the major differentiation. But there's also a consideration, are you working with somebody that does 7A business acquisition loans all day, every day?
Right.
And they're in tune with the nuance of the SOP, and they've been through several shutdowns, and they know what to expect. What's their average closing timeline when things are normal? Those are the types of questions to ask. The other thing you could do is look on the SBA's website for the stack ranking report. The top SBA lenders, there were 1,400 lenders that did an SBA 7A loan in the 2025 fiscal year. So essentially 1,400 banks or non-bank lenders that did an SBA loan. But the top 10 did over a third of the total $37 billion in volume.
Yeah.
And the top 25 did half the total loan volume.
Okay,
What I'm saying is there's 25 lenders out there that do this all day, every day, and are really good at it. And there's a whole bunch of other lenders that can do it, and they might do it well on a case-by-case basis, but they're not necessarily seeing the nuance day in and day out to learn how to adapt and react or to get out ahead of a potential issue that could slow you down.
Yeah, if you scroll down that list, and I would encourage everyone to do it, it's for educational purposes, if nothing else. But when you get to the bottom of that list, it is shocking how many have done one.
And to your point, that's where the horror stories come from. Somebody where you are a guinea pig to somebody doing their first or second SBA loan. So,
or the last one they did was 3 years ago before the last 4 major changes.
yeah. And if you're working with someone that's not familiar with the new SOP that came out in June, there were some substantial changes. Neil, to your point on kind of where things are at and what people can be doing, you're kind of in 2 buckets today is the way I look at it. You had an approval and you did not obtain the PLP number. So you're now completing the closing items, waiting for the SBA lights to come back on. Hopefully that borrower has gotten the transcripts. Hopefully they're continuing to move through that process. Banks are still open. Banks are private. This is private equity. These aren't SBA dollars. These are balance sheet dollars from these lending institutions. People always ask that too. Is it SBA dollars or is it bank dollars? The other bucket of which people are sitting on, it's kind of business as normal. People should still be writing LOIs. They should still be submitting offers. They should be going into underwriting. They should be getting commitment letters. They should be getting those initial closing checklists. They should be getting assigned to a closer and working through that closing checklist. But the one thing that they got to do quickly is get the tax transcripts. Again, we're probably going to hit on that 3 or 4 times. The AI recording will pick that one up as a important caveat from today's call. But it is business as normal if you missed getting your PLP numbers. So, once the lights come back on for PLP lenders, you should be able to have that information in E-Tran and move through it in a matter of days or a week or so. So I've heard some folks out there saying that well, my seller's really concerned that, they can't move forward, they can't get a buyer, and that's really not the case. If a transaction initiated today, even if the closure went through the end of the month, those transactions should close by year end without problem. Average closing timeline should be 45 days. So that's 45 calendar days from submitting to underwriting to closing. So I see Neil's eyes perking up on that, yeah, you can still get deals done in 2025, even if this goes through the end of the month.
J-Dub, let's talk further about the queue, because that intrigues me. So the longer it's shut down, or if it opened up tomorrow, you were a week away from a closing, you thought, or days away, or the longer it stays shut, how further out do you get pushed? And when it opens back up, the government, do the floodgates open? How does this look?
So hopefully you're working with the lender that's got a closing team that's still generating loan docs and just not putting dates in them. They're still gathering closing checklist items. And once again, for a preferred lender, once E-Tran accepts everything that's been uploaded, and they've been uploading all along because the system stayed open, they're just not issuing the numbers, should go pretty quick. Now, there may be some closing attorneys that weren't planning on doing 35 closings on a given Tuesday afternoon after it opens up Tuesday morning, but those are just logistics. The process of getting that number should be pretty smooth for your preferred lenders. For the others, to your point, Cress, it just depends on how many days this backup goes for how deep that queue gets. And the longer it goes, the longer it'll take the SBA to work through that queue. And unfortunately, the same goes for the IRS. There's a lot of other groups besides SBA lenders requesting tax transcripts, and that queue can get pretty deep.
And there is no way to know your line number in the queue. It's not like they give you a ticket number and they say, go wait over there. So unfortunately, a lot of people will ask that or have asked that in previous shutdowns is where am I? So you don't know that, but it does move quickly as a PLP lender with it being electronically submitted.
Yeah, so the question was, is it going to be like going to the DMV? You got your ticket and you're just sitting there waiting for them to call your number.
Yeah.
Hey, J&J, if I could
there you
follow
go.
on with a little question related to that. Since you guys have decades and decades of experience, you've been around for some shutdowns before. Can you tell us a little bit about what the last shutdown of 35 days looked like, and once it ended, and what that looked like for your bank and your borrowers as far as timing?
So I want to share, J-Dub and I have only worked at 2 banks in our career. And prior to being at Live Oak, we were still at the #1 lender in the country at the time. We both left in April of 2018. And it happened to be the month Live Oak took over as the #1 SBA lender in the country.
I'm sure that was a coincidence.
It had nothing to do with the 2 of us, but we were really, really lucky in our timing. Because of that, our whole careers, we've been at lenders that did a good job identifying the potential shutdown, getting transcripts ahead of schedule, getting as many loan numbers as we could ahead of schedule. And even at that 35-day mark, we weren't delayed by much because we had most of our loan numbers to get through that 35-day period and continue closing on time.
Would you go so far to say that the lawyering was more of a delay in the net total delay than the banking?
I would say that the fear of things going wrong can sometimes be worse than the things going wrong. And if you have the info to get ahead of the problem, and in this case, everybody knows they got to get ahead of the problem and go get their tax transcripts right away. I'm hoping it really won't be too bad for anybody with that delay. But in the event that this gets drug out, I want to talk about some alternatives that might work and some alternatives that might cause more problems down the road. Because as these things get delayed, everybody starts to look for a bridge loan or a seller note or something so people can shake hands, sign documents, and go in and start transitioning ownership. And there's a big difference between third-party bridge financing that can be refinanced and a seller note based on the new SOPs that can't be refinanced for a while. JW, you want to talk about the criteria it has to meet?
Yeah, so in order for a seller note to be refinanced, a couple of things have to occur. One, it has to be on unreasonable terms. And most important, though, it has to have been seasoned for 24 months. So that is not a short-term solution in order to have the seller carry the deal in a paper just to be able to refinance it with SBA. That's not going to work. They don't make exceptions during these shutdowns to refinance seller carry paper. The alternative may be private note, where that note still has to meet some qualifications, be either a balloon or a high interest rate, unreasonable, there has to be a cost savings, something along those lines. So if there is an alternative that has to be structured, please reach out to your lender to make sure that what that solution is doesn't cause you more heartache on when the SBA does reopen.
Please reach out to a top 25, at least a top 50 lender, somebody that knows the SOPs well. Make sure it's somebody you know and trust. You bank with people, not institutions. You got to have an individual that you know and trust to review whatever your stopgap measure is and say, yes, I can take this out at this point in time, assuming the business is performing. Please don't just jump to a conclusion and hope that it can be taken out at some point, because you might be very disappointed.
This is an interesting point you're making. Like, people are going to start making other plans. It's kind of an unintended consequence of a shutdown. What do you think people aren't thinking about with this shutdown? Like, what else is there in regards to SBA deal flow that people are worried about getting their number? We talked about that earlier, but what should they be worried about, or what are some side effects that you might also see coming out of this?
I would add one real quick. I think that if a buyer is purchasing a company that has concentrations within government contracts,
Yep.
that when they acquire that company, there might be some lumpiness to that expenses and that revenue generation and being able to collect on that revenue. So if there's a company that is wholly providing services to government and they haven't been able to provide services, nor have they been able to be paid, and maybe there's a working capital component, you're going to need to relook at that. And you may need to go back to the lender and say, hey, I might need a little bit more working capital because of the company that I'm buying. It has a little bit of lumpiness. They're probably going to be 30 or 60 days delayed on, collecting on their revenues, and I'm going to be 30, 60 days delayed on creating new revenues. So the unintentional impact to the direct business, and if this goes on for a long time and you get updated financials, you may see some pain in those financials from, the month of October as it relates to the shutdown.
Where we're at now, those of you that are watching or listening, if you have any questions, please in the chat, please put your questions in there. We're going to go through those in just a little bit. But J&J kind of sounds like a law firm here. So J&J, we, the housing crash, COVID, things that shut down business for long periods of time or have great effects on business, takes SBA and banks quite a while sometimes to rebound from that because of the historical aspect of what happens with the numbers, where are things going. This isn't the case. The government will reopen at some point and we'll be back in business. But there are some people out there for whatever reason, let's say they just absolutely under the gun, they have to sell right now. They do a seller financing type deal. Is that something then the banks could jump into and get refinanced or fund at a later date, or are they just stuck with that deal that they have in front of them?
Yeah, so I'll try to make this really clear. Don't do seller financing as your bridge gap. Try to avoid that at all costs because there's a 24-month mandatory seasoning of that paper before an SBA lender can refinance that. If someone's in a situation like that, Cress, a third-party private lender, you might have to pay the interest rate on that, but a private lender that has a balloon to that note would be something that is eligible to be refinanced. The other thing too is if depending on how long this goes out, make sure that your seller is really good at closing their books and that the buyer is really good at opening their books so that you have continuity between that ownership change between one set of financials and a new set of financials.
Good answer, John. If you're going to go down the seller financing path, in a best case scenario, it's 2 years of on-time payments before a lender can consider the refinance. Still has to cash flow. Sometimes you want that to match up to a tax year so you can see 2 tax years of cash flow. So there's a lot of considerations there. They can't plan on getting their lump sum in exactly 24 months. It might be longer. I see a question in chat. Somebody wanted to clarify a PLP lender still can't get a loan number through E-Tran, even though E-Tran's automated for PLP lenders. And that's correct. E-Tran's open for PLP lenders to upload all the documents into, but it's not going to start issuing loan numbers until the shutdown's over.
Do we have some other questions? Jeff, do you want to go through the questions?
JR,
I
I
maybe
want
want to bring up.
oh, real quick. You kind of sped through this at the top, JR, but in regards to who can get access to that number, the general population can't. You said only your SBA banker, only an SBA banker can access that E-Trans system. Is that correct?
That's correct. And even within the SBA bank, whether that's, Live Oak or Newtek or Huntington or pick your top 25 lender, even at those banks, typically that's limited to the loan closing group at that bank to log in and look. And they're pretty much in that system all day, every day. That's where they live. They're uploading those documents and getting those loan numbers, and they'll let everybody know right away once it's received. But it's not like a seller can ask you as the broker, hey, go check. I want to verify the story. I want to make sure this is really what the holdup is. You're going to have to rely on the lender's feedback and know that the lender is as motivated as anybody to get that number. That's how they make a living too.
Hey, gentlemen, I've got a question that came through. Want to know that if they were already in the process of closing, but the month now turns over, where do we stand with having to have updated financials?
Really good question. It's going to depend. So you're going to have 60 or 90-day benchmarks that are required. But we've also seen some businesses that were pretty volatile and revenue is all over. And for a business that's pretty volatile, a good lender may want to see September's closed out or October closed out. If you're lucky, you'll be dealing with a lender where common sense will prevail. And as long as they're within the guidelines of SOP, they won't require new financials. But once again, if it's a volatile business and they want to make sure it's staying on track, if they had some government contracts and they want to see if they were paid, you may be looking at getting updated financials. Good question, Cress.
Good answer.
I want to share one more thing, and this is to try and limit the surprise factor out there. One thing that we don't know until we pull the PLP number is if there's any type of error codes. And then let me just walk into this a little bit. What the SBA is doing, because of so much fraud that was out there related to PPP loans, EIDL loans, things of that nature, and the default related to it, is they are checking buyers against the pool of EIDL loans that are out there, PPP loans that are out there based off of individual tax ID numbers. And so what we have seen is if you have a buyer that may have an affiliate business or related business that had an EIDL loan and forgot to pay it, thought it was a PPP loan and thought it was forgivable, or hasn't paid as agreed, or maybe didn't provide the necessary information, those are coming back with error codes that are preventing E-Tran from issuing a PLP number. So as trying to be ahead of the game here, asking the borrowers, and this goes to any, other lenders or anybody on this call, is asking them if they had an EIDL loan at any time, if they have an EIDL loan, and what the status of that EIDL loan may be. The worst thing that could happen is you're waiting for the government to come back on, everyone's excited, you're prepared to close, and then all of a sudden this EIDL error code comes back from E-Tran, and that delays the closing even more. So you can't know one way or another if there's going to be that error code because E-Tran's not on, but at least having the conversation about any existing EIDL loans on the buyer side could be helpful to make that an easier conversation, or to have all parties be prepared.
HA Dub, on that note for EIDL, or some people refer to them as EIDL loans, it ends in an L, so that means it's a loan. It's not a grant. It's not a gift. But when you get that error, how do you clear it? Is there a way to work through closing documents to resolve that issue? Or does it real deal have to be paid back before we can get an SBA approval number?
So the most of the time, what is happening, if they're adding additional debt or something like that, and that may be the case that there needs to be a subordination agreement. The SBA needs to subordinate those. That has tended to occur, although I did see one just yesterday where the SBA required that an EIDL loan get paid off. But to go back to your initial question in regards to what can the borrower do? A lot of the time, the SBA will provide a phone number where the borrower can reach out to the EIDL loan hub and ask what the error code is to see if they can provide documentation to clear that error code. We have had some success with borrowers working directly with the SBA to be able to get those error codes cleared. So the majority of them seem to be resolvable. And then there have been some where, unfortunately you get lost in the black hole of no solution, but those are far and few between.
All right, we're going through questions here.
This may be an obvious one, but is it safe to say that all of the different SBA loan products are affected the same with this shutdown, or some of the loan products treated differently?
Neil, great question. If it's under the SBA master program, which would be an SBA Express loan, SBA Express line of credit, an SBA small loan, a micro loan, SBA Advantage loan, those all go through that kind of E-Tran or GP process. Outside of that, some on this call might be familiar with the 504 loan program, which is strictly for, real estate or long-term fixed assets. So occasionally we see a 504 being used on a transaction to fund the real estate piece of a change of ownership. The process for those is a little bit different because those always have to go to the SBA. So the 504 program, they have a committee approval. They then take that committee approval along with a bank partner approval, send that to the SBA. Someone at the SBA actually reviews that request and has to issue an approval, not just a credit approval, but the SBA also has to review any environmental reports in addition to any and all appraisal reports on the subject real estate. That is where you could see some additional backlog. So if anyone on this call has a project that is being financed by both a 7A loan and a 504 loan, knowing that an individual at the SBA will have to review that and that there will be a longer backlog and that those reviews take longer. That process is going to get stretched out a little bit more. So really good question.
I've got one here that has come through chat. We touched on this earlier, but I think they're wanting a little bit more clarification. The question reads, at what point of the PLP lender loan application process is the loan number normally assigned? For example, is it after the loan has already been approved by the bank's underwriting department?
I love this question. It depends on the lender. So there are some lenders that will utilize the SBA's automated process of issuing a loan number as part of their underwriting process for the actual bank approval. So there's some lenders that are getting that loan number way early in the process before the bank's even approved the loan. The vast majority of lenders will wait until the bank's approved the loan and the borrower's accepted the approval. In other words, they've signed the commitment letter before moving it into closing and requesting a loan number, because there's a fair amount of work that's going to go into that. There's a lot of documents that need to be uploaded to get to that point. But it is pretty flexible. Banks can request these earlier and earlier in the process, especially when they're looking at a potential shutdown to get a little bit ahead of the curve.
So it sounds like there's some flexibility here. While you were just talking, I had a interesting question pop into my mind that I've never thought of before. Is there any cost to the bank to apply for a PLP or a GP number?
Just time. So
Yeah.
there's
Okay.
time and people involved in getting it, and there's work for the buyer and the seller to get those documents together, and we've got to be far enough along with the purchase agreement drafts to be comfortable that the project size isn't going to shift, or AR is not going to get pulled out or added in. I mean, we got to know our structure and what's included and what's not. So no specific hard cost to apply for that loan number, but there's time and people involved, so there's certainly expense.
Yeah, and there is a time and point of which the lender has to pay the guarantee fee as part of that authorization. I don't know exactly that time frame, but as part of that SBA issuing that authorization is that they need to receive the fee that funds the program. So,
Yeah.
And gentlemen, I was hoping that during this breaking news IBBA Insight segment that we could break the news that the government opened back up. So I keep hoping. So, keep checking the old Twitter thing, right? But at what point, and especially we get closer to holidays and different things going on, at what point, not to hit a panic button, do people say, hey, this is real. This is not the 1 week, the 10 days. This is at what point do we start worrying?
Anecdotally, I would say you never want to be the longest closure in history. I don't think that's ever good for business for anybody. So, we are 10 days into this. 35 days has been the longest. So, I mean, we still have 3.5 weeks ahead of us. I don't think there's a the world is falling type of scenario on that. I think there will be, even if the full budget is not approved, a CR or a continuing resolution is typically what you will see to get the government up and running for 90, 180 days, something along those lines. So I don't think any political party wants to have the longest closure on their watch, especially in today's environment.
J-Dub,
Hey, Cress, but from a broker's perspective, though, to your point, if you've got a seller that thought they were going to close in 30 days and mentally they've counted the dollars that they're going to get after tax, and they've named their yacht already, and they're envisioning themselves floating around an island, please ask them to keep their head in the game and keep running their business and keep revenue on track. so that if this goes longer, they then don't have a new problem with their financials not looking like they need to update an approval. As long as they stay focused, keep the business on track, don't take their eyes off the ball, they will get there. I don't foresee this shutdown getting in the way of somebody eventually closing versus not closing, unless they take their eye off the ball and the business financials fall apart in the meantime.
J&J, I've got a question that came in through chat that is just incredible. It's a unique situation, but I think that's why it's so interesting. So one of the audience members, April, asked, I have a cash deal on the table, which is scheduled to close next month. So obviously not impacted by the government shutdown or the SBA not processing PLP GP numbers. Here's the interesting part. The seller has an SBA loan that needs to be paid off at the closing. How will the government shutdown impact this transaction? Are they accepting money or are they not when it comes to payoffs? Or does it only affect the commercial lender?
We'd need to clarify a little bit. Typically when we hear this, it means they have a 7A or 504 loan with another bank that's being paid off at closing, and the shutdown will have no impact on that.
I'm sure.
On the other hand, they could have an EIDL loan, and I believe they should still be able to get a payoff. I think that's an automated process. I will double check and follow up with everybody, but they should still be able to get a balance to pay off even an EIDL loan.
All right, we've got another one from Lawrence. There's a lot of detail here, but I'll cut to the chase. An environmental waiver was required, and apparently that needs to be approved by the SBA before the PLP number that's already been provided can be used to close the transaction. Do you know if environmental waivers are currently being reviewed at the SBA, or is that one of the services that's on hold?
I do not believe that they are meeting to review those. The personnel, if you had sent an email to SBA, you'll get a very automated response that they are closed for business right now.
Neil, you've been patiently waiting to jump in. Go ahead. I see your lips and then you.
Well, I want to respect Jeff's got some great audience questions. It did trigger in my mind. We're talking a lot about origination of SBA loans, but what about existing loans? And Live Oak is known for a great service department, but do SBA borrowers have to keep paying their bill because the government shut down? I joke, but what's happening with like requests for modifications of loans and the servicing work that's happening at banks? Touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, so for most servicing actions, if a borrower is working with a preferred lender, that preferred lender has a certain amount of unilateral authority to make modifications to that loan agreement within a certain realm of options on that. So again, important to understand that the 7A loans are held by the bank. They are not a government asset. They are a bank asset. So the bank holds that note. A PLP lender has a unilateral authority to make certain modifications to that note without having to get approval from the SBA, but has to still at least notify the SBA that those changes are being made to the loan. So more importantly though, yes, borrowers still need to pay their loans. You're paying the bank back, not the SBA back on that. So that is an important reminder to everyone on those. But yeah, servicing actions can still be processed to a certain extent during the closure if they can fall under that unilateral authority. Since E-Tran is accepting but not spitting things back out, there is some limits to that depending on what that modification might look like.
At this point, we're going to ask if there's any further questions. Please ask them through the chat. We're going to try to end at around 3:30 Eastern time. So if you have any further questions, please put in the chat. We'll gladly ask them of the Jays and get answers for you.
I've got another question for you guys. Is is there a communication going to you guys? Are you guys getting, communication to at the bank level of what to do in this situation?
We're in good company. NAGL, National Association of Government Guaranteed Lenders, does a really good job staying in touch with SBA leadership. There are lobbyists that are on the ground on Capitol Hill. Most of the larger banks have their own lobbyists that will be having conversations with House members and senators, and we hear a lot, and we do our best to get out ahead of things whenever possible, which once again is why those top 25 to 50 lenders are able to do so much volume. They have a good pipeline of information that allows them to try to get out ahead of challenges when they're on the horizon. Live Oak Bank does have a public facing page that discusses the shutdown, and we will share that link in chat. But we're not the only ones. A lot of the other lenders are doing a good job pushing out content. They're putting posts on LinkedIn. They've got things on their website that are just sharing updates about both the IRS and the SBA as we receive them.
Gentlemen, that was a lot of great information, a lot of useful information. Let's hope this shutdown ends soon and we can all get back to the business of selling businesses on our end and financing businesses on your end, utilizing SBA financing. I'm sure that's all what we all want. At this point, we'd like to thank our guests, John Randall and John Wahl from Live Oak Bank. Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you so much again for sharing all your insights and your thoughts and answering all the questions that were given to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for the opportunity. And Cress, you absolutely get the Optimism Award. I would have loved to announce the end of the shutdown on this call with you. Unfortunately, we'll have to wait a while.
Well, look, we stretched it out. We kept trying for it to come through, so it didn't work, but thanks again. And also special thanks to, again, my co-hosts, Jeff Snell, Neil Isaacs. Guys, couldn't do this without you. Thanks, guys.
Cress, thanks again. And again, we are open for business, even though the SBA is not. So thanks for having us on today. And I wish everyone a wonderful weekend.
I want to tell all of our listeners and those of you watching today, thanks again for joining. I hope we're able to answer all your questions and address your concerns. Go over to ibba.org/insights where you'll find every episode of our show for your listening enjoyment and edification. While there, you can subscribe to the show and never miss another episode. So at this point, thanks again. God bless. Have a healthy and prosperous day, everybody.